Welcome to Life Stories, where we share tales of resilience, transformation, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Today, we bring you the story of Sarah, a devoted wife and mother whose world was turned upside down by betrayal. But through heartbreak, she discovered courage, love, and the power to rebuild her life. It's a journey filled with pain, hope, and the lessons that only life's toughest moments can teach. Join us as we explore her inspiring path to freedom and renewal. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey and discover the story that awaits. It is still painful to recall the day my world crumbled. The day my life as I knew it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. That day taught my husband, Michael, and his mistress, Jessica, an unforgettable lesson. But for me, it was the beginning of a journey I never expected to embark on, a path filled with heartbreak, resilience, and ultimately, self-discovery. I remember it vividly. The kitchen was quiet, the kind of calm that feels eerie in hindsight, as if the universe had taken a deep breath before everything collapsed. Michael's phone vibrated on the table, and though it was a small sound, it caught my attention like a piercing alarm. Michael had always been casual about leaving his phone around the house. But recently, he had started carrying it everywhere, guarding it like a precious treasure. Something inside me whispered that I needed to check it, though I was afraid of what I might find. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone, betraying the fear that churned in my stomach. The screen lit up, revealing a message from an unnamed number. The words on the screen froze me in place. As though time itself had stopped. I miss you. I can't wait until tomorrow. The message burned into my mind like a brand, searing through every fiber of my being. My heart pounded against my ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the words were too intimate, too personal to dismiss. As I stood there, spiraling into despair, a small, sweet voice pulled me back. My daughter, Emma, wandered into the kitchen, her innocent eyes lighting up as she asked, "Mom, what's for dinner?" She was unaware that her mother's world had just come crashing down like a house of cards. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile, one that felt like I was trying to hold up the sky while everything beneath it crumbled. "Soon, sweetheart," I managed to say, my voice betraying none of the storm raging inside me. Dinner that night was a test of endurance. Michael acted as if nothing had happened, chatting with the children, laughing, and even winking at me across the table. What used to feel like the comforting gestures of a loving marriage now felt like daggers piercing through my chest. Each word, each glance, was a painful reminder of his betrayal. After putting Emma and her younger brother, Noah, to bed, I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable. My heart pounded like a war drum as I walked to Michael's study, where he sat engrossed in his work. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if I could bring myself to confront him. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to appear calm. Michael looked up with faint surprise, as though I had disturbed his perfectly crafted evening. "What's wrong?" he asked casually, his eyes flickering back to the computer screen. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage I had. "Who is she?" The question hung in the air like a lead weight, and the silence that followed felt suffocating. Michael slowly raised his head, his face a mixture of shock and tension. In that moment, I knew I wasn't imagining things. His guilt was written across his features. Even before he opened his mouth, "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice betraying his lie. I saw the message. I pressed, my voice growing firmer. "Stop lying to me." His expression changed as the weight of my words sank in. Instead of remorse, a darkness clouded his eyes. "Fine," he said coldly. "Her name is Jessica." The words fell like stones into my heart, each syllable heavy with finality. "It started as nothing," he continued, his tone detached. "But now it's different. I felt my knees weaken beneath me. What do you mean by different? My voice came out as a whisper, trembling with fear and disbelief. Michael sighed impatiently and stood, walking to the window. He avoided my gaze as he said the words that would forever haunt me. She understands me in ways you never could. I'm with her now, and we should end this. It felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. The man I had loved for 20 years, the father of my children, was willing to throw it all away for a fleeting affair. How will you explain this to the kids? I asked, my voice quivering with suppressed emotion. We've already discussed everything, he replied coldly. We'll sell the house, give you your share, and start fresh. His words finally broke the dam I had been holding back. The tears streamed down my face as I whispered, more to myself than to him, I can't believe this. Michael's response was a shrug, as if it were all so simple, so logical. You'll understand soon enough, he added. But I didn't understand. I couldn't comprehend how 20 years of love, sacrifice, and shared memories could be discarded so easily. That night, as I lay awake, his words echoed in my mind like a cruel symphony, tearing me apart. Every corner of our home felt like a mockery of what we had built together, the laughter, the struggles, the promises. I knew I couldn't sit idly by. Deep down, I realized this was just the beginning. Michael may have unleashed a storm, but I wasn't going to let it destroy me. The morning after Michael's confession, I awoke to a house that felt unbearably hollow. The laughter of my children and the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed at odds with the storm raging inside me. I moved through the motions of breakfast and school drop-offs, keeping my face calm and my voice steady. But my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that Michael's betrayal went deeper than just an affair. His confidence, his casual mention of splitting assets. It all felt too calculated. That evening, after putting Emma and Noah to bed, I steeled myself for a task I had been avoiding. I would go through our financial records. Sitting at the kitchen table, my hands trembled as I logged into the accounts we had shared for years. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but as I clicked through transaction histories and account details, red flags began to appear. There were transfers to unfamiliar accounts, withdrawals I hadn't approved, and investments I didn't recognize. The numbers painted a grim picture. It became clear that Michael wasn't just planning to leave me for Jessica, he was orchestrating something far more sinister. The idea that he might try to leave me and the children with nothing sent chills down my spine. I felt like a small boat caught in a vast, stormy sea. But I couldn't afford to drown. That night, as the reality of my situation sank in, I realized I couldn't face this alone. The weight of it all was too much for one person to bear. There was only one person I could think of who might help. Though the idea filled me with apprehension, Michael's mother, Margaret. Margaret and I had never been particularly close. She was strong, independent, and at times, distant. But she adored her grandchildren. And deep down, I believed she wouldn't stand by and let them suffer. The next morning, I gathered what courage I had left and drove to her house. The car ride feeling longer and more nerve-wracking than ever before. When I arrived, Margaret opened the door, her sharp eyes immediately scanning my face. Without a word, she ushered me inside, her maternal instincts clearly awakened by the distress I couldn't hide. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with concern. Through my tears, I told her everything: Michael's affair, the message I had found, and the suspicious financial activity. It all poured out of me like water bursting through a dam. Margaret listened intently, her face unreadable as she absorbed each word. When I finished, silence hung between us like a thick fog. For a moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake coming to her. But then she spoke, her voice calm but laced with a quiet fury. "He won't get away with this," she said. Her words surprised me. "What do you mean?" I asked, wiping away tears with trembling hands. Margaret rose from her chair and walked to a small desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of documents. "Michael doesn't own what he thinks he does," she said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. As she explained, a glimmer of hope began to take root in my heart. Years ago, Margaret had insisted that key family assets, including our home, be held under her name for safekeeping. Michael, oblivious to the details, had no idea he couldn't legally claim them. "I'll transfer everything into your name," she continued. "I won't let him destroy you or the children's future." Her words were a lifeline, pulling me out of the storm I had been drowning in. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of strength. Margaret's unexpected alliance was more than I had dared to hope for, though there were still battles ahead. I realized I wasn't alone in this fight. Together, we would protect what mattered most. The days that followed my conversation with Margaret were a whirlwind of activity. We moved quickly, meeting with lawyers and preparing documents to safeguard everything Michael might try to take. It felt surreal, collaborating so closely with a woman I had always seen as somewhat distant. Yet, in those moments, Margaret became my unexpected ally, a pillar of strength I hadn't known I needed. Her focus was unwavering, her determination fierce. Every step we took felt like a layer of armor being added to protect the children and me. At night, when I finally had time to sit alone, exhaustion would creep over me like a heavy blanket. But I knew I couldn't stop. Meanwhile, Michael carried on as if nothing was amiss. He came and went from the house, maintaining his cold, detached demeanor. Occasionally, he would ask about the children in a way that felt more like an afterthought than genuine concern. The sight of him made my stomach churn, but I swallowed my anger and maintained composure for Emma and Noah's sake. One evening, as I helped Emma with her homework, she looked up at me with those wide, innocent eyes that always seemed to see right through me. "Mom," she asked softly, "why isn't Daddy home much anymore?" The question pierced my heart like an arrow. I paused, struggling to find the right words that wouldn't taint her young mind with the ugliness of what was happening. Forcing a smile, I said, "Daddy's been very busy with work, sweetheart. But everything will be okay." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, filled with a worry far beyond her years. I hated that she could sense something was wrong, even though I was doing everything in my power to shield her from the truth. As the days passed, Margaret and I grew closer. What had once been a polite, surface-level relationship transformed into something deeper. We weren't just working together to save assets, we were forging a bond born out of necessity and mutual care for the children. Margaret shared pieces of her own life with me that I had never known before. She told me about her own struggles, about how she had been hurt by selfish decisions made by people she once trusted. Her words resonated deeply, and for the first time, I saw her not just as my mother-in-law but as a woman who had faced her own storms and come out stronger. One afternoon, as we finalized the transfer of assets, Margaret placed her hand on mine. "You're stronger than you realize," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "And no matter what happens, we'll get through this together." Her words brought tears to my eyes, not out of sadness but from the relief of knowing I wasn't alone. The weight of Michael's betrayal was still heavy, but with Margaret by my side, it no longer felt unbearable. Yet, even as we prepared for the legal battle ahead, a quiet tension hung in the air. The court date was approaching, and the thought of facing Michael in that setting filled me with a mixture of dread and determination. I knew that he and Jessica likely believed they were untouchable, that their plans were foolproof. I pictured them sitting together, scheming in some sleek apartment, laughing at the thought of how easily they would discard me and the life we had built. The thought made my blood boil, but it also steeled my resolve. That night, as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. The pain was still there, raw and fresh, but beneath it was a growing strength I hadn't known I possessed. I wasn't the same woman Michael had underestimated. I turned off the light and climbed into bed, knowing that the storm wasn't over yet. But for the first time, I felt ready to face it. Whatever lay ahead, I wouldn't back down. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about fighting for my children, for myself, and for the life we deserved. The morning of the trial arrived with an eerie calmness that belied the storm brewing in my heart. The house was quiet as I prepared for the day that would decide so much of my future. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel composed and confident, though my hands trembled as I fastened the buttons on my blouse. Margaret arrived early, her presence as steadying as a lighthouse in a storm. She stood in the doorway, her face set with quiet determination that mirrored my own. Together, we made our way to the courthouse, the silence in the car thick with unspoken fears and hopes. As we entered the courtroom, the tension was palpable, like a taut wire ready to snap. Michael sat confidently on one side, Jessica by his side, radiating smug superiority. Her perfectly polished demeanor was a stark contrast to the chaos she had sown in my life. Michael leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, his expression one of calm arrogance. I took my seat with Margaret beside me, her steady hand resting briefly on mine as if to remind me I wasn't alone. My lawyer, a composed and meticulous woman named Evelyn, greeted me with a reassuring nod. The proceedings began with Michael's lawyer presenting their case. His tone was sharp, cutting through the room with a confidence that made my stomach churn. He painted Michael as a hardworking man, burdened by the weight of supporting a family while I, he claimed, had played a minimal role in managing our finances. Each word felt like a slap across my face, reducing years of shared sacrifices and struggles to nothing. Across the room, Michael watched with that same smug expression, as if he were already victorious. But Evelyn was prepared. When it was our turn, she rose calmly, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. She began by dismantling Michael's narrative, piece by piece, presenting evidence of his financial deceit. As she laid out the fraudulent money transfers and hidden accounts, I saw Michael's confident facade begin to crack. His smile faltered, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as the weight of the evidence bore down on him. The moment of reckoning came when Evelyn revealed Margaret's pivotal role. She explained how Margaret, foreseeing the possibility of betrayal, had transferred key assets into my name. The courtroom fell silent as the revelation hung in the air, heavy with the implications. Michael's face turned pale as he realized the extent of his mother's betrayal. He glanced at Margaret, his expression a mixture of shock and fury, but she met his gaze with unwavering resolve. Jessica, who had been quietly exuding confidence until now, began to fidget, her perfectly composed exterior showing the first signs of cracks. I could see her scanning the room, perhaps calculating her next move now that the foundation of their plans was crumbling. Evelyn's final blow was a masterstroke. She presented documents that not only proved Michael's intent to defraud me but also highlighted his attempts to transfer assets to Jessica. The evidence was irrefutable, and the weight of it crushed any remaining hope Michael might have had. When the judge delivered the verdict, his voice was clear and unwavering. "The court rules in favor of Sarah Daniels," he said, granting me full rights to the assets and holding Michael financially responsible. Relief washed over me, mingled with a deep, bittersweet satisfaction. I glanced at Margaret, who gave me a small, resolute nod. Across the room, Michael sat slumped in his chair, the weight of defeat pressing down on him. Jessica wasted no time. She shot Michael a look of pure contempt before rising gracefully and walking out of the courtroom without a word. Her departure was as final as the gavel that signaled the end of the trial. As I stepped out into the fresh air, I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my chest. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was the return of my dignity, my freedom, and the beginning of a new chapter. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. The storm had passed, and I had survived. The days following the trial were a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Though the legal battle was over, the emotional wounds it left behind were still raw. I spent the first few mornings sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, staring out the window and trying to process everything. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. Michael's absence was a glaring void, but one I slowly began to welcome. For so long, his presence had filled the air with tension, a constant reminder of the betrayal. Now, the silence felt like a chance to breathe, to rebuild. Margaret visited often, her presence a soothing balm on the raw edges of my heart. She had become more than an ally, she was a part of my family in a way I never thought possible. Over cups of coffee, we spoke of the future and of the children. Though she was firm in her resolve to protect us, I could see the quiet ache in her eyes. She had lost her son. Not to death but to his own choices. Michael, I learned, had retreated to an apartment in Boston. I tried not to think about him, but on some days, the memories crept in uninvited. I wondered if he regretted it, leaving us. The life we had built. For something that had dissolved so quickly. I didn't have to wonder for long. One afternoon, as I returned home from picking up Emma and Noah from school, I noticed an envelope on the doorstep. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized Michael's handwriting on the front. It was strange seeing something so familiar, yet now so foreign. I waited until the children were settled before opening it. His letter was written in a tone I hadn't heard from him in years, sincere, raw, and stripped of arrogance. Sarah, it began. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say these things. Even if they don't matter anymore. I betrayed you. I underestimated you. And in doing so, I lost everything that ever truly mattered. The letter went on to detail his regret, his loneliness, and the realization of what he had done. He admitted that Jessica had left him, that the life he thought he wanted was hollow and meaningless without his family. I know I can't undo the past, he wrote, but I hope one day you can forgive me. Not for me, but so you can find peace. When I finished reading, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not pity, just a quiet, calm acceptance. The man who had written this letter was a shadow of the Michael I had once known, and I no longer needed his validation or apology to move forward. I tucked the letter into a drawer and closed it, both physically and metaphorically. It was a chapter of my life I was ready to leave behind. The children were my focus now. They were my anchors in the storm. The reason I had fought so hard to protect our life. Emma's laughter and Noah's hugs reminded me daily of what was truly important. Margaret became a constant presence in their lives, a grandmother fiercely dedicated to their happiness. One evening, as I watched the children play in the yard, Margaret joined me on the porch. We sat in companionable silence for a while before she spoke. You've come a long way, Sarah, she said, her voice warm. I've seen you grow stronger through all of this. I smiled. Not the forced smile I had worn in the darkest days, but one that felt real. Born from a place of healing. I had no choice. I replied. The kids needed me to be strong. And you were, she said firmly. You still are. In that moment, I realized how far I had come. The storm that Michael had unleashed hadn't destroyed me, it had forged me into someone stronger. Someone who knew her worth. The future was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, I was excited to face it. That night, as I tucked Emma and Noah into bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. This was my life now, quiet, imperfect, but mine to shape. And for that, I was grateful. The weeks turned into months, and life slowly began to feel normal again, or at least, a new version of normal. The days were no longer filled with court hearings, lawyer meetings, or the oppressive weight of uncertainty. Instead, they were filled with the sound of Emma and Noah's laughter, the steady rhythm of work, and the comforting routine of family life. Margaret became an integral part of our lives. visiting often to see the children and share simple moments of joy. She was no longer just my mother-in-law but a partner in this new chapter. Over coffee one afternoon, she shared a story from her past. Something she had never spoken of before. When I was younger, she began. Her voice quiet but steady. I trusted someone who betrayed me in ways I never thought possible. I lost so much because of it. But I learned something important: we can't control what others do, only how we respond. Her words stayed with me long after she left that evening. Margaret's strength, her quiet resilience, was something I had come to admire deeply. In many ways, she had become a role model for me, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and perseverance. Michael, on the other hand, faded further into the background of my life. Occasionally, I would hear snippets about him through mutual acquaintances. He had moved to Boston, as I suspected, and was struggling to rebuild his life. Jessica had left him not long after the trial, and his social circle had all but disappeared. The man who once exuded confidence and control was now a shadow of his former self. I thought about him less and less as time went on. The letter he had written remained tucked away in the drawer, unopened since that first night. It wasn't bitterness that kept me from revisiting it, but a sense of closure. I didn't need to relive those words or dwell on his regret. My life was moving forward, and that was enough. One sunny afternoon, as Emma and Noah played in the park, I sat on a bench watching them, my heart full. Their laughter carried through the air, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the chatter of other families. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly present, no longer weighed down by the past. Margaret joined me a few moments later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one and sat down with a sigh, watching the children with a soft smile. "They've been through so much," she said, her voice tinged with both pride and sadness. "But look at them, they're thriving." I nodded, my chest tightening with emotion. "They're stronger than I ever realized," I said. "And they've been my strength too." Margaret looked at me then, her eyes filled with something unspoken. "And you," she said after a pause. "You've come through this with more grace and courage than most people could manage." Her words filled me with a quiet pride. I had fought hard to protect my children and rebuild our lives. But hearing it from someone who had witnessed the journey meant more than I could say. That evening, as I tucked Emma and Noah into bed, they each wrapped their arms around me, their hugs warm and full of love. Emma looked up at me with a sleepy smile and said, "Mom, you're the best." Tears prickled at my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of joy, of relief. In that moment, I realized I had everything I needed. The life I was building was not the one I had imagined, but it was beautiful in its own way. Later, as I sat on the porch watching the stars, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the pain, the battle. It had all been a crucible, forging me into someone stronger, someone who knew her worth. Margaret's words from earlier echoed in my mind: "We can't control what others do, only how we respond." And I had responded. I had fought for my family, for myself, and for the life we deserved. I had chosen to let go of the anger, the hurt, and the past, embracing the future with open arms. The stars above shone brightly, as if to remind me that even in the darkest nights, light can still find a way through. The storm was over, and I was finally free to begin again. As I sat on the porch, watching Emma and Noah play in the yard, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The storm that had once threatened to destroy my life was now a distant memory, leaving behind a stronger, wiser version of myself. Margaret's unwavering support and the love of my children had carried me through the darkest days. And now I stood on the threshold of a new beginning. Life isn't always fair, but it teaches us resilience, love, and the importance of holding on to what truly matters. The past no longer defined me, it had shaped me. But it didn't own me. The future was mine to create. Thank you for being part of this journey. Subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of courage, transformation, and hope. See you in the next video.